Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. If you have blood sugar issues and you're looking to finally resolve them, I would love to work with you. Please go to bloodsugarcoach.com, put in your information, and you'll be able to book a free 30-minute session with me. And we can see how I can help you. I have personally resolved my own type 2 diabetes. I am no longer a diabetic, and I did so with natural medicine. I've gone on to help a lot of people to also completely resolve their blood sugar issues so that they now have normal blood sugar. So if you'd like to no longer have blood sugar issues, please go to bloodsugarcoach.com. That's bloodsugarcoach.com. I look forward to working with you and enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 307. I am so excited for today's guest. We have with us an amazing naturopathic physician. And as you know, as listeners of the Learn True Health podcast, you know that my favorite doctors are naturopaths. So Dr. Alan Christianson, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ashley, thank you so much for having me. I'm totally jazzed to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, you not only are a naturopath, you are a naturopath endocrinologist. So you specialize in thyroid function, adrenal health, and the metabolism. You've got some amazing books under your belt about healing the thyroid and healing, quote unquote, adrenal fatigue or adrenal health and fatigue. And now you've got this new book coming out all about healing the metabolism. I'm just so excited to dive into this subject. So many people say, no matter what I do, I can't lose weight, or I feel like, I exercise to death and, I hardly lose anything, or I try to cut calories, or I tried fasting and it doesn't work for me. And some people have to cut out all the fat. Some people have to eat nothing but fat. And it just is not making any sense. So what's going on? So I'm really excited to dive into all these topics today with you. But first, I'd love to learn a little bit about you. You've been practicing in Scottsdale since 1996. I'd love to learn what led you to want to become a naturopathic physician and specialize in endocrinology.
Yeah, awesome question. My original trajectory probably would have been astrophysics. Those were my biggest interests as a child. Up until, I don't know, somewhere around adolescence, I realized how my health was really a barrier to how I thought life should be. As a kid, I was born with some complications from cerebral palsy, including seizures, and really didn't have coordination or ability to move or do sports. And I don't know if that was relevant, but some mixture of all of it. I was pretty obese by the time I was an adolescent. And, coupled with just the structural issues, I was pretty miserable about it all. So the social parts, I think, were what really hit me the hardest and just kind of forced my hand, so to speak. And just spending time with health books and figuring out ideas about being deliberate about lifestyle, I was able to make radical changes. And it impressed upon me a couple of things, one of which was that, how your body works and how your health can be one of the biggest factors for whether or not you can be happy and fulfilled. If those things are barriers, nothing else really matters, it seems. And I guess one of the other big things was that I had seen some doctors about health issues and about my weight as well. And, it didn't really seem that anything I got from them was useful or helpful. And here it was, that stuff that me as a 12-year-old kid found from books, just reading in libraries. It was such a disconnect that, I realized there must be a lot of people out there that are just suffering and struggling for want of information that should be readily available. So
Absolutely.
Some mixture of that made me want to go into healthcare and medicine, but I knew that lifestyle had to be a big part of that because that was the big needle mover for me. And I didn't even know about the naturopathic profession. You've talked about that, and that's awesome. Super glad to hear your support. But I didn't even know about the profession until not long before I was studying in it. I was about to go to a conventional medical school, not knowing any other models. And as I got closer, the mentor doctors made it clear to me that even if I had, done my plans and gotten more training on the side in nutrition, lifestyle medicine, that I could be going up against the standards of practice, and I could be held, outside of standards of practice and face board actions, even if I was helping people and even if they were happy about it and everyone was getting better. And that just blew me away. And for a while, I was just, clueless about the direction to take. And then I learned about the naturopathic profession and a brand new school then opening up in Arizona. And it was just a perfect fit. And then in the profession, there was a big rift between conventional thyroid care and some of the alternative models. And I saw many examples in which the alternative models would help a lot, but I saw many in which they did not. And so it impressed upon me that there were these hormones that were just huge factors as an intersection between lifestyle and health, and that if they were off in some ways, that someone's efforts may not pan out in ways that they should. And it just seemed like I had to make sense of that because a lot of the struggles people had were struggles like I had myself, but the things that I would have just done or that I did do wouldn't always make a difference for them unless they had their hormones corrected and back to a good place. So it just became a total calling for me.
Isn't that amazing? As you're thinking you're going to become a medical doctor, an MD, and you learn that if you actually healed people and cured them and helped their body's ability to heal itself, that you might lose your license. Because how dare you not heal someone with drugs and surgery? How dare you?
Isn't that bizarre?
I'd love to know. So as you were looking to gain your health back, you had cerebral palsy, you had obesity, you were looking to gain your health back. What were some of the first changes that made the biggest difference, that made you go, oh, wow, food is medicine and nutrition is so important. I can't believe it. Like, what were some really big aha moments you had back then?
Yeah, funny thing. There was a little bit of fertile soil within the family. My father had a lot of starts in his careers, and one of them was he went to chiropractic school for a few years. He didn't end up completing or practicing, but there were some medical books around that I, just looked at and was curious about, and then also my parents had had Shaklee vitamins. It was Upper Midwest, and these are just around the household. My grandma sold them, and so we had this sense about how you could improve your health through nutrition. And everyone was somewhat aware about, good foods, and honestly, a lot of processed foods were brand new, and we weren't really on the radar about how relevant they were just yet. But the books I stumbled across were ones like Adele Davis, Let's Be Well, and from the advice in those books, my first steps were actually cutting out bread with meals. I didn't really have a clear reason why, but I was just trying to cut out perhaps empty calories or whatever the advice was at the time. But so I did that. I cut out processed sugar. I did start consuming protein shakes on a regular basis. We had some Shaklee ones way back when. And those are the main 3 nutritional steps. So candy, cake, desserts. I just ditched all of that. And I had many, many years of just never any of that at all. And then I started exercising, and that was a pitfall. The funny thing was that the first iteration of that was, I thought I would just play football with no sports experience. I would just sign up for the football team, and it seemed like a good idea, but no kidding. On the way to cross the field to get to practice, on the first day of practice, I blacked out from the effort.
Oh my gosh!
So I had to take it slower than that. So I took it really slow. I honestly did laps around. We had a little island that separated our kitchen from our living room at our home at the time when I was in 7th grade. And I did laps around that. And it was probably I don't know, maybe 50 yards for a lap. And I would add a few laps every day. And eventually I was starting to run a few miles outside and doing some weights, but I just did it crazy slowly and built it up so gradually. And it was all life-changing. It was really incredible.
Smart. That's so smart. I love that you mentioned that there was a pitfall there, because so many of us get really eager in January and run out to the gym and then we end up hurting ourselves. And we need to just take it, be gentle and take it slow. And maybe it is just walking around the block is how we start. Just doing something and being gentle and then working our way up. But that is such a true experience for so many of us. I love it. I love it. So you've been helping people reverse thyroid issues and adrenal health issues and helping them gain balance back to their metabolism for many years. Can you share with us what are some of the thyroid conditions that people commonly come to you for that you have had really great success helping to reverse and so they no longer have those symptoms anymore?
For sure. As far as reversing in a lasting way, the big two there would be Hashimoto's thyroiditis and then Graves' disease. And it's a funny thing. People who may know about this, Hashimoto's is a disease in which the immune system breaks down some important structural components of the thyroid and leaves it unable to just produce enough hormone, almost like you bomb the factory and the factory can't put out cars anymore, something kind of like that. And then Graves' disease, I think about this like a short circuit on a doorbell. So it's also an immune attack, but imagine you got, your doorbell's going off all the time and you're opening the door, but nobody's there. So Graves' disease is kind of like that. The thyroid is always opening the door and pouring out hormone, even though your body quit asking for it a long time ago. And what's really counterintuitive, so it ends up producing too much thyroid hormone. And the part that's really not intuitive is that they're almost the exact same disease. They're so ridiculously close to each other in terms of what gives rise to them and a lot of the steps that help to treat their causative factors. But they're often different in terms of how they play out with symptoms. And they actually overlap. A lot of people have both of those conditions. And another thing that's not intuitive, Hashimoto's, the data is pretty strong that regardless of what someone does, whether it's well-advised or ill-advised, about 26% of the time, Hashimoto's goes away. It completely stops by itself and reverses. And a person who experiences that, they do have a higher risk of developing other versions of thyroid disease over time, but for many of them, they're done with it. And the funny thing is that it's given rise to a lot of ideas about things that can help Hashimoto's that may not have even helped. They were just things that someone who was in that lucky 26% might have been doing at the time. They wore blue socks on Tuesday, so now that's a way to heal Hashimoto's. And it's with big numbers, those things happen. But there's a lot of things we do know that can help and can make those numbers look higher. And Graves' disease, they're both serious. They both cause just major symptoms and debilitating problems. Graves can be deadly in the short term. I almost wish it wasn't called Graves because that's such an ominous name, but that was a doctor. They call it von Badslow's disease in Europe, which I think is a lot nicer. But Graves' disease, oddly enough, has a much higher rate of remission once you can pull someone out of the thyroid being overactive. So once you can stabilize their hormone levels, about 95% of the time, Graves' disease just quits within about 12 months. So those two are, and when we talk about remission, I think about that at two levels. One of which is, it's all better and the person cannot do anything about it. It's just fine on its own. And even in that scenario, they still want to be mindful of it and still screen for it in the future because it certainly is at greater risk to become abnormal. And that can happen for many people. With Hashimoto's, I think, again, about a quarter of the time it happens just spontaneously. And I would argue half the time or more can happen when someone's doing the things that are most helpful. But the easiest goal that I encourage people to keep in mind is that the other kind of remission is remission of the symptoms and the issues, getting it to where you're feeling at least as well as you did before the whole thing started. And I'd love the listeners just to keep the mindset that that's always possible. I've really not seen cases in which someone was not able to reverse their symptoms. In some cases, that means remaining on therapy to make up for what the thyroid is not doing, for sure. But nonetheless, most of us take a pill or two each day. So that's, I'd rather have someone regain their health and feel well again. And I think that's always an option on the table for them.
When you say most of us take a pill or two, are you referring to supplements or medication or both?
Just in general. I think something I think people sometimes fixate on with thyroid disease is that they've got to have a remission, meaning they're not on thyroid medication or else nothing else matters. And something I often say to reframe that is, hey, let's think about this. I take a few pills each day and most of us do. And the top goal, if the highest goal of your health is to take one fewer pill per day, well, you can do that. You can just take one less pill. But honestly, the highest goal to health is to thrive and to feel your best. So I encourage people to focus hardest on that, on really just getting back to being vibrant and at the kind of health they've always wished for. And the cool thing is that that's completely in alignment with the best steps to raise their odds of having their thyroid work completely normal again. So if that happens, that's a great bonus, but they've got just nothing to lose that way.
I've got a few more questions about that, and then I definitely want to move on to talking about your Metabolism Reset Diet book, which I'm really excited about. You mentioned screening. Are there thyroid tests that you recommend that maybe other doctors wouldn't do, or just are standard blood tests enough?
Yeah, awesome question. And this is something to where this gets to be where there's a lot of distinctions between the conventional and the natural approach, and they've each got a few really good points, but neither one, I think, by itself pulls the best practices together. So the conventional side, the good thing is that they understand that you can evaluate thyroid function by looking at blood markers, and the natural side understands that sometimes that can be partial, that can miss things. So what I think is relevant is that the blood markers are useful, they are good tools, but the main drawback about them is that we've got these reference ranges which come from just averaging the scores from people who get their tests done. There are some values like blood pressure, for example. They have the GNC, or I'm sorry, JNC, the joint conference comes together every few years, and they decide what's the safest level of blood pressure for adults for screening, what's the best level to be at when you're on treatment, and they base that off of data. But other tests, other markers, they're just population averages, and you can draw a bell curve distribution, and you can cut off points to where you'll exclude 2.5% that you'll define as abnormal, just statistically. And that's where the high and the low ranges come from for thyroid markers. And the drawback about that approach is most people who get thyroid tests, they've got thyroid problems. That's why they're being tested. Many of them are already on treatment, and the ones that get tested the most are on treatment, but they're not stable. They're getting screened a lot, or they've got symptoms, and the doctor says, hey, the doctor or they are suspicious of their symptoms, and they test to see if their thyroid is relevant. So the negative is that people who have healthy thyroid scores, they contribute less to what that average is, and the average becomes more representative of those who have thyroid disease. So the implication is you've got to really be at an unusual level to get flagged in that context.
I absolutely love that you brought this up, that you laid it out so well. Going to an MD, you could take the same blood work to an MD and to a naturopath, and they see your body totally differently. That naturopaths are looking for optimal. MDs are waiting for you to break before they can give you medication.
I'll go a little deeper on that too, if you like.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah.
So, and the pitfall too is that then sometimes optimal is, well, just to clarify a bit more. So we look at a couple different values for the thyroid. There's the main one's called the TSH, which is your brain telling your thyroid to work. And it's backward. The more your thyroid is underactive, the more your brain yells at it. So the higher the number gets, and vice versa. And then we look at the free hormone levels, T3 and T4, and we look at whether there's antibodies attacking the thyroid. Other things that are included can be reverse the inactive forms of T3, and also proteins that come out of the thyroid when it breaks down. And so what happens is that the healthy people, they have much lower TSH scores than people do that have thyroid disease. In terms of numbers, most labs say you're normal when you're between about 0.4 and 4.5. But the studies done on people that don't have any thyroid problems show that they don't really have scores above 1.9, and even that's a little unusual. But they also don't have low scores. So the conventional world often ignores those on the high side of normal, but many in the natural world will say that it's okay to be below normal or to take thyroid medication and make the TSH go too low. And it's sad because that is dangerous. One more big pitfall is that there's antibody tests that can show if there's an immune attack against your thyroid. And if that's there, that completely confirms Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. In the case of Graves' disease, only about 0.3% of people with Graves' disease do not have measurable Graves' antibodies. So there's a pretty good correlation. But Hashimoto's, it's not like that. Some studies have suggested that half of people with Hashimoto's do not have measurable antibodies. So it's really common someone goes to a doctor and says, hey, I've got these symptoms, I would like my thyroid tested. And a doctor may even go so far as to test for Hashimoto's antibodies, but not understanding that rate of false negatives, they can look at the results and say, oh, you don't have these antibodies, therefore you do not have Hashimoto's. Your symptoms are from something else. And it makes me nuts because it's just a high rate of false negatives.
Oh my gosh. I just can't even imagine how many people are on medication that shouldn't be on medication, or that aren't on medication that need to be on it, or are on the wrong dose. I mean, it is pretty crazy. I'm really glad you're here today, because I know the listeners who have thyroid issues would love to maybe gain some more clarity around this. Can they book an appointment with you, or should they buy one of your thyroid books? What would be a good place for someone who's on medication or thinks they need to be on medication to make sure that they're making sure that they're in all the right ranges?
All those things are options. I've talked about that in some of the books. We've also got the option of doing advisor visits with our doctors. We've got a team of 6 doctors that between us, we've got about 40 years experience in thyroid care. And you can book an appointment to just chat with them and get a sense about what your diagnosis would be, what your best options are, what your lab values mean. And you can do that without traveling. Those that wish to have us manage their care, we're happy to have people travel just once to see us, and we can manage from the distance. But without traveling, can certainly get our input on your case and understand what your needs would be.
Great.
And I'll get that link to you also.
Okay, fantastic. I am so excited to talk about the metabolism and getting into that. I'd love to hear the story that led you to want to write this book. Has it been a long time coming, or did you have an aha moment?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm a both. That's been, I guess, like my core health issue, and it was a big thing when I was young, and it's resurfaced a few times during adulthood for sure. But I always ask my audience about their big needs, and what finally kind of clicked in my head was that, there's 3 things people try to line up. There's their energy levels and their weight and their appetite. You've got to have control of all of those. And I think at this point, even people have different ideas about what they think healthy diets are, and that's fine. But I think everyone knows that if they do something extreme, they will lose weight. If they're in their model, if they cut out, all animal foods, or they cut out all non-paleo foods, or they go keto, or whatever it is, I think everyone knows that if they do something extreme enough, their weight will go down. But most have experienced that when they do that, it doesn't last. They don't feel well. Their energy tanks in the short term. And in many cases, their appetite goes out of control. So that the trick is not, what is the new list of bad foods you can cut out and really just starve yourself. But the trick is, how do you make it to where your energy and your appetite and your weight just line up again? I think most of us had at least some point in life in which they did. I was pretty young, but I remember being able to eat what I wanted and play when I felt like, and it all was fine. But somewhere along the way that changes, and that's not right. When that's off, there's something that's not working right with how your body regulates your metabolism.
So what regulates the metabolism? Let's start with what is in the body that says, okay, lose weight. Like, is it a part of our brain? What's the center that our metabolism lives in?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. And there's not so much, I guess, one meaningful answer, because a lot of parts are involved. But I guess the way that I've thought about this with the book is, what's the main glitch? What's the main piece of that system that's out of place for most people? And I would argue that comes down to the liver function. So what happens is that none of us get exactly the amount of food we need for a given day. And we always get a little more, a little bit less. It's never precise, no matter, even if we are like, weighing with a gram scale, whatever, we're never exactly spot on for what our needs are. And when we're healthy, it's our liver that buffers all that. So make this up. Let's say that today I'll have, more food than I need. And if it works well, my liver will hold that excess in 2 forms. There's some triglyceride and some glycogen, some stored carbs and some stored fats. And the liver can convert carbs into fats as need be, but it can store those. And then let's say a different day that I miss a meal. So if things work right, my liver would pull out those stores from the past and, keep like a backup generator, just keep the lights on, and I'd feel reasonably fine and not crash. But the extent to which that doesn't work, then that's an impairment of metabolism. So when it's off, if your food intake is above your needs, your liver can't easily store that. And it stores it as toxic fat inside the organs, which is the worst kind, or as visceral fat, or as subcutaneous fat. And then on the other end, if there's too little that you've got for that day, your body can't just flip on that backup generator. You crash. You're exhausted, the food cravings show up, your brain fog, whatever else happens, all these consequences. So I think the liver is a big part of how you regain that, is getting your liver more able to manage fuel again.
And if the person has liver issues, so not enough nutrients, for example, maybe they're selenium deficient, they're deficient in some of their vitamins and either whatever the liver needs for phase 1 or phase 2 detoxification, does that gum up the works?
You're spot on. You're exactly right. So I think about three main categories of problems, one of which is that there's just too much. And I should back up. I call this fuel, because in this context, carbs, fats, ketones, they're kind of the same thing. They break down to oxaloacetate at the level of your liver. So it's not a matter of changing them from one to the other. It's just the total quantity. So sometimes there's just too much total that happens. Other times the body is just not needing very much. That happens too. And in other scenarios are like what you're describing, to where some of the cofactors needed for all those reactions to occur are lacking, or there's toxicants that keep the cofactors from working right. And those are the various ways that the liver may not be able to manage fuel properly.
So if a woman, let's say she's in her 40s or 50s, and she noticed that she could easily lose weight her whole life, but now that maybe her hormones, she's moving towards premenopause or menopause, and she's noticing now that because of her hormones are different, and she's attributing it to her hormones being off, that she just can't lose weight like she used to. Do hormones also play a role in weight loss, or is it that the liver is also being affected?
It's a fun thing, and that's a beautiful thing about the space we're in of thinking about the body holistically, is that there's a lot of entry points, and they can be very connected. So during the transition through perimenopause to menopause, there's a lot of juggling that takes place between the ovaries, the adrenal glands, and the liver is a big part of that story. So what happens is the level of estradiol made by the ovaries goes down. And in a healthy system, the liver takes more hormone precursors from the adrenals and converts those into one called estrone. And when the liver can do that on the fly, it's almost like, like a relay race where it grabs the baton and keeps going, and the pace doesn't slow down. But when it can't do that well, that's when we see more problems of the whole perimenopause and menopause transition. Like you said, like the weight gain, and also the more severe hot flashes, night sweats, mood changes, that can all relate from the liver not being able to properly buffer it. And that's the thing that's so almost magical with the liver, is that there's somewhere like 9,500 chemical reactions going on in your body at any given moment. And all the things you need for that, you're not getting the raw materials when you need them. You're getting this stuff at your meals, and most of the things you're using, you're making as secondary byproducts out of the stuff you get from your meals. But your liver's holding on to all that. Your liver's this big warehouse that's got all the stuff that we eat and all kinds of things we make out of the stuff that we eat, and it's doling that out there on the fly as we need it in that moment. So when it does that right, so many things work well. But when it doesn't, then the metabolism really suffers.
It's really interesting. So the liver is taking the estrogens, because people think that there's estrogens, just one hormone. It's like basically a group of many hormones, right?
Yeah.
So it's taking the estrogens, breaking them down so we can get them out of the body through the bile. And the liver is getting it out of the bloodstream, getting it out of the body, and helping us so that we can have a bowel movement and get it out of our body. I've heard that when we have constipation, that the body could actually reabsorb those estrogens that are now sort of not healthy for the body, and they're almost like toxins that the body could reabsorb if someone has constipation.
Spot on. And this is called enterohepatic recirculation. And like you said, there's a lot of things that our liver sends out, and out means to the colon, and ideally out in the toilet. It should leave. But constipation or other issues of bacterial translocation, leaky gut type things, a lot of wastes like hormones or various chemical byproducts that our body wants to get rid of, it may not get rid of. And what it can also happen is, if it doesn't work right, you might make those wastes into even worse wastes that come back in and recirculate. And it's a funny concept. We put a lot of attention on the gut, which is awesome. It's super important. But the weird thing is that your gut is still outside of your body. It's kind of like the surface of your skin, but it's on the inside. It's only when things cross the gut and into the bloodstream that they're in your body. And the first stop is the liver. All the venous blood pulls the nutrients from the gut and pulls that straight to the liver before anywhere else. And your liver's got a group of unique immune cells called Kupffer cells, and they're watching what's going on in the intestinal tract. And they decide if if it's a safe world that we're in, or if there's dangers and if the immune system might attack itself by mistake. Those are all decisions that Kupffer cells really carry out.
So when you started thinking about the liver as it relates to metabolism, was this like I said, over time, or did you have an aha moment, or were you helping a woman or a patient with their liver health and then saw that they like all of a sudden started losing weight and you're like, hey,
Yeah.
this something's working. We're helping the liver and everything's falling into place?
Yeah, you're right. So it was more so the latter. And the program that I'll tell you about, we put into the Metabolism Reset Diet. It was one that we were first using for reversing diabetes, and that's exciting, and that's very consistently reversible for type 2 diabetes for the vast majority of people that have been suffering with it for 23 years or fewer. What's happening is they're now calling type 2 diabetes leaky liver. So it's a disease first and foremost of the liver more than it is of the pancreas. And we learned that as people are developing this condition, what's happening is the liver is getting so clogged with fuel that it can't hold anymore. And it's just leaking fuel out when your body's not asking for it. And that's why blood sugar is higher in people who are diabetic. The hallmark sign is high morning fasting blood sugar. And we've thought a lot about, well, what's the bad food they ate? But wait a minute, first thing in the morning, they didn't just eat. They were sleeping all night. It was leaking out of their liver as they were sleeping. And even more elaborate now, they've shown that you can do some specialized tests and you can tell which parts of someone's blood sugar came from their liver and which parts came from a recent meal. And most people that have diabetes or diabetes risks, they'll also have high blood sugar after a meal. But when we break it down like that, it's almost all coming from the liver. Almost none of it comes from the meal. It's all about the liver overreacting.
So how do you get the liver to come back into balance? And how did it overreact in the first place? Is this a lack of nutrients, too much oxidative damage, too much toxins or stress? What is it that had the liver go out of balance?
Yeah, some mixture of those three factors: too much fuel, too little fuel requirements, or inability to use fuel, which you're describing a lot of the good things, or a lot of the things that cause that, the free radical damage, toxicants, lack of micronutrients. Those are things that make it not able to use fuel properly. So you've got just more fuel in the liver than it can deal with, and it starts to leak out at some point. And what happens, we think about our body composition, and the liver is also looked at clinically when it's analyzed. This is not done for screening purposes, but you can find out when someone's doing like a biopsy, for example, how much fat is in the liver. And the liver has to be a lot leaner than the body. Once your liver gets above 5% fat, it's diseased. And we call that fatty liver syndrome. And along the way, as these ideas were crystallizing, I was also seeing just how rampant fatty liver syndrome was, and how, the way it's really defined, it probably, even the active forms of it are affecting about 40% of adults with no signs whatsoever of diabetes or liver disease. And the earliest versions apply to most everyone who has struggles with their metabolism. So it's really common. And that was part of the genesis of this too, is thinking about helping fatty liver.
Fascinating. So where do we start if someone, through listening to what you've shared, pretty much has a good feeling that their liver is out of balance? Where do we start to help the liver come back into balance?
Well, so I argue that the beautiful thing is that it's really changeable. This is a very resilient organ. In theory, you could lose 80% of it and it could grow back again. So when it's the culprit, it's something that you can fix pretty well. And people have seen that if they have radical weight loss, they often see improvements in those ways. But the trick is, how do you make that sustainable? And there's a couple of points I argue that are different from common dieting approaches. One of which is that it's not so much the goal to have a diet that makes you continuously lose weight. It's important and helpful to do so, but it's a strain on the body. So I think about it more so as just a really finite project, like a short block of time. I argue for 4 weeks in the book. There's data saying that if you go much longer than 6 weeks, you can start harming thyroid function and impairing metabolism. So it's not good to be in a weight loss mode for too long. Another point that I talk about is the importance of having adequate amounts of protein during that phase. And that's part of also why I talk about fuel as being a distinct category. You can skimp on fuel for a while, but if you skimp on protein too much, then you'll miss out. You talked about phase 1 and phase 2 and some of those conjugating agents. And yeah, a lot of those are essential amino acids. So if your body is too low on those, the liver cannot work as well. And also there's more of a loss of muscle mass and a higher chance of regaining.
In the first 4 weeks that you mentioned, you don't want to go more than 4 weeks of weight loss. Is this the ketogenic diet that you're talking about, or is this calorie restriction? What does your program look like?
Yeah, so it takes on elements of both of those, but that's not the goal of either. So I wouldn't call it calorie restriction, because the drawback about that is if your only goal is restricting calories, you can easily compromise protein. And yeah, there's harm on the liver during that state. That's a paradox about just overt fasting too. If you just consume, there can be valid reasons that are effective for spiritual purposes or whatnot, but in terms of health goals, there are those to where the health can be compromised because there's a lot of waste coming out of the stores, but your liver now has very little of the conjugating proteins it needs to process those wastes. So we still provide good amounts of protein, and that also is not consistent with the ketogenic approaches. The ketogenic approach, funny, there's two facets to that. There's ketosis, nutritional ketosis, and then there's ketogenic. And anytime you're at enough of a deficit of fuel, your body will convert a little bit into ketones. And it's been debated as to whether the ketones are helpful or if they're just things that happen to be around while there are other positive changes happening in the body. And not clear that way. But ketogenic refers to a state in which the body can only make ketones because it's got so little protein and carbohydrate coming in. And in that case, that's actually a separate variable than being in a state that could cause loss of weight or loss of body fat. So you can gain weight when you're ketogenic, and you can lose weight when you're not. It's really a matter of just total fuel intake. And ketones are just another fuel source. If there's too many of those, they can form triglycerides just as well as glucose can, and those can be stored pretty easily as well.
It's so true. My husband and I did the ketogenic diet on and off for about 2 years, and you can really mess your body up. He ended up damaging his kidneys. I ended up damaging my liver. Like, yeah, major. We that's what had us snap out of it and go, this is a diet that is, you cannot do this diet without really working with a professional, especially like a naturopath, someone that can monitor blood and monitor your organs. And, it's not something that we should just do willy-nilly. And then his body just told him, go vegan, and which was crazy because he's been like a huge meat eater his whole life. But he went vegan, and everything's coming back into balance. Now, in terms of protein, do you have like a goal, like how many grams of protein a day that people consume? Or is it just make sure that we're getting enough? Do people need to eat animal products, or can they do that eating a plant-based diet?
No, they certainly can on a plant-based diet. And the program, I'm very specific about amounts and targets that way. It's important. And I've got a bias towards plant proteins for a couple of reasons. A big one is really the pH effects. So when your body is going through a detox phase, when you're pulling out old waste from the liver, there's a lot of things that can concentrate, things like uric acid, for example. Mm-hmm. And if there's also a large pH challenge, then there's a huge risk for things like gout, or for separate reasons, gallstones to form. So it's important to really have the body not have as many acids to clear while it's undergoing some detox. So that's a tricky thing. And you brought up a good point. As important as proteins are, I do see the literature point towards the benefit of plant proteins as being valuable that way. In the diet, I made it to where someone certainly can do it if they're paleo or vegan, and recipes can be done with or without. But there's 3 main parts to the program. There's really like 2 shakes in 1 meal. And I do strongly encourage vegetable protein for the shakes. The meal can be done with vegetable protein. I also give options for those that do have animal protein. But yeah, vegetable proteins have advantages.
In your shakes and your smoothies, are people also adding greens? Or is it just the point? The point is you want to make sure that someone is getting all the protein they need throughout the day.
Yeah, protein's important, but for sure there's a lot more to it than that as well. So greens, I've done a lot of thought in terms of phytonutrients. And it's funny because phytonutrients are really phytotoxins. They're actually poisons, but the amounts that we get in food can be strategic. They can actually make the liver work better in ways that can be useful. So I've chosen a lot of plant foods for that purpose. I've also put a lot of reliance upon resistant starch in the program. And that's exciting stuff. There's so much data about resistant starch doing a real good job in helping the liver have less strain from the intestinal tract. It seems that short chain fats from colon bacteria like acetate or propionate or butyrate are critical for proper metabolism. And the most effective way to make those is to have these quasi fiber compounds called resistant starch in higher amounts in the diet.
What is resistant starch?
Pretty cool. So it's like imagine like the best side of carbs and fiber, but the worst of neither. So, the best part about carbs is that you can fuel the body and create healthy blood sugar from that. The negative is that you have to use hormones to manage it, insulin, glucagon, cortisol. And then fiber, the best side is you can fuel good bacteria, but the negative is you can cause mineral malabsorption. You can also create imbalances in bacteria. So the cool thing about RS is that you've got fuel, you can make it into glucose, but unlike every other food, it's not absorbed in the small intestine. So there's no such thing as a RS spike. It's not possible. It's only absorbed gradually in the large intestine. So rather than a spike and a drop within 90 minutes, what happens is you get this gradual influx of fuel over the course of about 7 to 9 hours that's spread out evenly with no spike. And so carbs, we're getting about 4.5 calories per gram, and fiber, we're getting none. RS, we're getting about 2. And the remainder is feeding the good bacteria, especially those that generate these short chain fats. So it's been documented, various forms have been documented in human blinded clinical trials to reverse leaky gut, to lower blood glucose levels and stabilize them, to cut colorectal cancer risk, been shown to cut breast cancer risk, also diminish visceral fat formation. So just lots of really great things that often the body can have go wrong.
Well, resistant starch sounds delicious. What kind of foods do we get it from? Like sweet potatoes? Can we get it from a food, or do we need to, is it like a supplement?
Both. And sweet potatoes are awesome foods. They've got a little bit, but not a lot. Regular potatoes do have it. And there certainly are those who are concerned about potatoes as nightshades, but the part of potatoes that have resistant starch are not the parts that could have any of the alkaloids, which is kind of neat. So white potatoes are really high when they're boiled. Oddly, but when they're baked or fried, the high temperature breaks down quite a bit of that. And then also we see white beans as the next big food category. So like navy, northern, cannellini beans, and also just plain old white beans. And the last big food category that's highest in that would be bananas and plantains. But with them, once they ripen, they lose a lot of it. So it's more so when they're on the unripe side. Oh, I'm sorry. Last point, you asked about supplements. So a lot of the studies are on amounts that can be on the higher side from food. So in the program, I talked about how one could add in supplemental forms to reach the targets easily as well. But yeah, it's great to include the food sources for sure.
In your protein shakes, do they include resistant starch?
We do use one that has that built in, and that's the one we use in the clinical trial for the program. It's got per serving, it's 12 grams of resistant starch, which is pretty cool. Most food sources end up just being a gram or two, and most studies were done on 10 grams twice daily. So I wanted to replicate the amount that were used in clinical trials.
Tell me about your clinical trial. Is it over yet? Is it completed, or are you still doing it?
It is. No, we finished that and wrote about that in the book, and it was pretty exciting. And one point that came from the trial that I talked about a lot in the book was about the importance of waist loss over the importance of weight loss. It's easy to lose weight but not get healthier. But when your waist goes down, that's never a bad thing in almost all circumstances. And that's what we saw. So many had weight loss. And they were happy with that. That was great. But waist loss was really dramatic. The average was about 2.5 inches of waist loss over the course of that 28 days. And that was exciting to see because there's a thing called the height to waist ratio. And it's probably the strongest predictor that I've seen of total mortality risk and also cardiovascular risk. And it's really simple. It's, how tall you are. Most of us as adults, our height doesn't change too fast. We've often got a sense of that. So what your height is in inches, and divide that by your waist circumference around the belly button. And ideally, it's going to be half or less. So ideally, the circumference around the belly button is less than half of the height. And when it's above that, there's varying degrees of risks. So it's just a really great thing to see someone improve that ratio and have their risks plummet. In a lot of ways, this is a funny thing. I've thought about this a lot. There's many ways in which people cut out certain food groups and definitely will see their health improve. And, autoimmune disease or migraines or IBS or whatever else, there's lots of things you can hear about that people said, yeah, I cut out these food categories and they got better. But when you look at medical literature, all these things can also improve when there's a certain amount of waste loss. And so I wonder more and more if we've gotten off track and we've thought that foods were bad because things got better, when they may have gotten better just from not because of the particular food we cut out, but just the fuel quantity and any waste loss that happened.
Oh, that is very interesting. Yeah, because
Yeah,
some people, like I had an amazing experience going gluten free. Some people don't notice anything.
sure.
And I lost 25 pounds of water weight in going gluten free. It was just night and day difference. My husband and I, our ring sizes went down. His ring size went down 2 ring sizes just by cutting out
Wow.
gluten, and mine went down 1.5. I mean, and we've got pictures before and after. We look like, Bert and Ernie, different. One has we look like we both had round faces, and then a month later we both had, not round faces. So
Wow.
it was like we looked like Bert a month later, and that. So for us, going gluten free was really a big shift. But we were strict with it. No barley, wheat, rye, or oats, because gliadin is in oats, and that's very similar to gluten. And some people, like I said, some people can eat grains and they don't notice the difference. And other people cut out grains altogether and it's like life changing. But like you
Mhm.
said, what if it's not about cutting out the food groups, but about the waist to height ratio, which is
Yeah.
that indicator of health? That's really interesting.
There's some dramatic studies showing that people that had all kinds of these conditions, including severe autoimmune disease, not changing their food type at all, but just achieving weight loss, completely reverse the condition. So it's an interesting thing.
Very. Well, I'm really excited to learn more about your study and especially to read your book. Your book's coming out January 29th. So I know we're all very excited. Can we pre-order your book?
For sure. It's available pre-order on Amazon and anytime and good to go that way.
Excellent. We'll make sure to have the show notes. In the show notes, we'll have the link to your book. Now, your website's drchristianson.com.
Hmm.
And so people can work with you and your team of doctors through Skype, or they can go meet you in person, or they can read your books. And of course, all the links to that will be in the show notes of today's podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know that you had a very tight schedule, and I feel honored that you were able to make it today to be on the show and share this amazing information with us. I'd love it if you were to give some homework to the listeners, something they could do in between now and when they finally receive the book, because they'll all they'll pre-order your book now. I know we all will, because it just sounds fascinating. But can you give us some homework, something we can do until our book comes in late January, that so we can start getting on the right track to improving our liver health and feeding our liver and starting to turn the ship around?
One easy thing would be to start adding a serving of resistant starch foods into the diet on a regular basis. And to point this out, anytime you change the bowel flora radically, there can be short-term symptoms. And this is actually not a big problem with resistant starch. It can be a problem with some fibers, but some can notice them. So just if you're not sure if you've had problems with foods before, just go slow. Because what happens is when the bacteria population is not diverse and healthy, then you're often more sensitive to these types of food in terms of gas or bloating. So if you've had a hard time with plantains or bananas or potatoes or beans, you might even just do like a teaspoon dose of any of those that best fits your past experience or your food plans, even a teaspoon a day for a couple of weeks. And then afterwards, see if you can't tolerate just more typical quantities of that without issue. But yeah, the data on that is so strong and helpful and easy to start out that way.
And it sounds like everyone can benefit from including more resistant starch in their diet.
Yeah, yeah, powerful thing.
Terrific. Well, thank you again, Dr. Allen, for coming on the show. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to definitely dive into these topics further. Especially, I've watched your videos on YouTube, and I'd encourage listeners to go check out Dr. Allen Christianson's YouTube channel and subscribe to it. He has some amazing videos. I really enjoyed the videos around the adrenal health and how you kind of bust that myth around adrenal fatigue and the disease versus what's actually going on. I love that you said to one woman, the disease is not real, but the symptoms are. And then you further broke down and explained it. And I had adrenal fatigue or whatever it was I had. I was horribly
the condition
sick.
Formerly known as adrenal fatigue.
Yeah, that's it. I had that. And through diet, lifestyle, and nutrition and supplements, I completely, turned this ship around. But I was really miserable, really sick for a long time until I found natural medicine. That's why I do the podcast, to help others find the light, find the same amazing information that can help turn their lives around. And so I love that that's what you help people focus on, is breaking free from the mindset of the disease mindset, and helping them see that when we get put in a box of disease, this diagnosis, it really limits us, because then that just limits us in our ability to heal when we're looking at a disease model versus looking at a healing model. So I love the videos you do on YouTube. Please come back on the show. I'd love to have you back. And thank you so much for being here today.
Ashley, you're a really awesome host. You're super easy to talk to and really bright, insightful questions. So I'd love to talk further. We can go deep on thyroid, adrenal. Iodine's a big topic I've talked a lot about too, but anything I'd love to talk to you when we can.
Great. Well, we'll set it up. Thank you so much. And good luck with your book launch. I can't wait for it to come out.
Thanks so much, Ashley.
Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic true health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program.